Tai Lung will return.
When you think of Tai Lung from Kung Fu Panda, what's the first thing that comes to mind? For me, it's how brilliantly complex he is as a villain. His intense presence, terrifying aura, and raw power make him an unforgettable antagonist. But at the same time, he's a relatable character with intricate motivations, a burden of expectations, and a story of betrayal, which is the reason he's loved by so many fans of the film, including myself. His incredible character design, brilliant voice acting, and relentless thirst for vengeance alone make him stand out. And for most animated films, this would have been more than enough. But Kung Fu Panda nailed it by giving him a carefully crafted psychological depth behind his actions. The film doesn't just give us a powerful antagonist, it gives us a villain with an origin story that explains why he became the way he is. His evil isn't born out of some generic desire for destruction, it's the tragic byproduct of his past, and that's what makes his revenge arc so compelling. But why do we still think of him as the ultimate vengeful villain, even 16 years later when we've all grown up? Because DreamWorks perfectly crafted him every step of the way, but how did they do it? Let's break it down together. Before we can truly understand Tai Lung and what made him such a successful vengeful villain, we need to first understand the world in which he was shaped. Kung Fu Panda is set in the fictional Valley of Peace in ancient China, a world where Kung Fu is a revered art and a way of life. The valley is protected by the Jade Palace, which is home to the greatest Kung Fu masters in the land, including the Furious Five: Tigress, Crane, Mantis, Viper, and Monkey. Trained under the strict and disciplined Master Shifu, they are tasked with defending the valley and striving toward the ultimate goal: to see one of their own ascend to the role of Dragon Warrior, a prophesied hero said to bring peace and prosperity to the land. But that's not what the film centers around. It's around Po, the unlikely hero of the story, a bumbling, noodle-loving panda who dreams of becoming a kung fu master despite lacking the skill, strength, or discipline. But when Grandmaster Oogway, the founder of the Valley of Peace and the creator of Kung Fu, declares Po to be the destined Dragon Warrior, everyone's world is turned upside down. Po's journey from an ordinary villager to the legendary Dragon Warrior forms the heart of the movie. Po's declaration comes following another prophecy by Master Oogway. He foresees the escape of Tai Lung, a ruthless snow leopard imprisoned for his thirst for power. And that's when we are introduced to our villain. From the moment Tai Lung is first mentioned, the film perfectly builds anticipation around his character. When Master Oogway tells Master Shifu that Tai Lung will return, the entire atmosphere in the Jade Palace shifts to one of panic. Master Shifu calls for Zheng and orders him to immediately fly to the Korgum prison and tell them to double the reinforcement. Mind you, this is the same Master Shifu who was effortlessly fighting 1v5 against the Furious Five just minutes ago, terrified at the mere possibility of Tai Lung escaping the prison and coming back for revenge. At this point, we don't know who this Tai Lung is or what he is in prison for. Heck, we don't even know what he wants his revenge for. But one thing we for certain know is that this guy is a real threat, someone to be genuinely feared. And just like that, the film builds this tension so effectively that before Tai Lung even appears on screen, we are already on edge, dreading what's to come. And when we later learn what the prison is like, the tension only ramps up. The Korgum prison is about 4,000 kilometers away from the Valley of Peace in the freezing Tavan-bogged mountains located in modern-day Western Mongolia. The prison is literally carved right out of a mountain, with dozens of stone bridges holding over 1,000 heavily armed rhino guards. It continues down in what looks like a never-ending pit to the middle of the mountain, with only one way in and one way out. There's a circular pattern at the end of the prison with crossbows and even dynamite always pointed towards it. All this for a single prisoner who lies in the middle of this platform, bound by a tortoise shell with several acupuncture needles that restrict his breathing, while both his hands are tied to two large boulders, making him practically immobile. And who is this mysterious prisoner? Well, yeah, you guessed it, Tai Lung. At this point, like the Rhino Commander, I couldn't help but wonder, This is the prison Master Shifu wants to double the guards, double the weapons, and double everything for? The most formidable prison I've ever seen in any film, all for one captive. How dangerous could this Tai Lung really be? And my curiosity was answered shortly after by an escape that was even more spectacular than the prison itself. Seriously, Tai Lung's escape might actually be the coolest prison break sequence ever put on screen. Tai Lung waited 20 years motionless in this dark and freezing prison for one chance, and one chance was all he needed. After breaking free from his shackles, Tai Lung uses every weapon meant to hold him captive as a tool to craft his way out. He dodges and deflects the large arrows shot at him to build a sort of monkey bar ladder. He uses the prison's only lift to shield himself against the rain of arrows. He fights his way to the top against hundreds of rhino guards with his bare hands. As the prison begins to collapse, he climbs up the falling pieces of rubble and uses the explosives to topple the last unit of guards. And suddenly, Shifu's orders to double the reinforcement feel like an underestimation of Tai Lung's force and skill. Apart from creeping cold up my spine, this roughly 4-minute sequence revealed Tai Lung's character as a ruthless, intelligent, and incredibly talented warrior in the best possible way. The reveal exceeds the expectations that are set by his build-up throughout the movie at this point. If anything, it intrigues us as the audience to want to know more about this lethal predator and the story that made him who he is. Tai Lung was an infant cub when Master Shifu found him abandoned at the stairs of the Jade Palace, with no clues of who he was or where he came from. Master Shifu adopted him and raised him like a son, showing love and care as a father would. Tai Lung showed an eagerness to learn and master Kung Fu after he saw how impressed Shifu was by his natural talent. Shifu told him he had great potential to be the best of the best. Tai Lung relentlessly trained through blood, sweat, and tears under his master and his father. As he grew older, he became more and more ferocious as a warrior. Tai Lung was the first ever student to master 1,000 scrolls of Kung Fu. But despite the unparalleled vigor and mastery over his craft, his ambition only grew larger. He wanted the Dragon Scroll as an acknowledgement of his talent and strength. He wanted to be known as the greatest Kung Fu warrior. However, Grandmaster Oogway did not see things like this. For him, brute force and speed were not enough to be a dragon warrior. He saw a darkness in Tai Lung, greed and pride in his ambitions. And when Master Oogway denied him the Dragon Warrior title, it shattered his dreams. Everything he strived for, all that excruciatingly bone-cracking training, suddenly meant nothing, and his reaction only proved Oogway's point right. He couldn't take the rejection. He set upon the valley, directing his rage towards the innocent, causing havoc as a means to revenge. And when he attempted to seize the Dragon Scroll, Master Oogway stopped him and sent him to the Korgum prison for his malicious and vengeful intentions, where he remained confined for 20 years until his escape. But here's where things get interesting. On the surface, Tai Lung's story seems like a classic villain origin we've all seen a little too many times. You know the drill. The villain wanted power, he was denied, and in his anger, he sought revenge. Like, seriously, this model is so old and overused that it's almost expected in any villain arc. But that's exactly why Tai Lung feels like such a fresh character and interesting as a villain. I can't help but wonder, was it really the denial of the Dragon Scroll that ignited his fury, or was there something deeper, something more personal driving him? After all, Tai Lung wasn't just a power-hungry warrior. He was abandoned as a cub, left alone at the steps of the Jade Palace with no family, no identity. Could that sense of abandonment have planted the seeds of his anger long before Oogway's decision? I mean, yeah, but not really. Wait, let me explain. Let's look at another character from the film, one with a similar past. Our protagonist and hero of the story, Po. Just like Tai Lung, Po was also abandoned as a cub, with no clues of his origin. Yet, unlike Tai Lung, Po didn't grow up filled with rage or a thirst for revenge. Both Tai Lung and Po were raised by figures who weren't their biological fathers. As I discussed, Tai Lung had Master Shifu, who raised him with love and dedication, and Po had the GOAT, Mr. Ping. Not the goat, I mean, Mr. Ping wasn't a goat. He was a goose who had a noodle shop famous for its secret ingredient, soup. He showered Po with warmth and unconditional affection. And yeah, I don't care what you say, but for me, Mr. Ping is the GOAT parent in all of the animated film's history. Anyway, on the surface, Po's and Tai Lung's upbringings seemed to parallel each other. Both were adopted, both were loved, and both were guided by father figures who deeply influenced their lives. Both had dreams of greatness. Tai Lung wanted to become the Dragon Warrior, admired and respected by all, while Po dreamt of being a kung fu master despite his awkwardness and lack of skill. So, at least on paper, their paths should have taken them down similar roads, but their progression couldn't be more different. If Tai Lung's abandonment were truly the cause of his descent into villainy, then how can Po, with an almost identical background, go on to become the hero of the story? Sounds like a bit biased on the writer's end. Well, no. You see, the difference lies in their goals, or more so, what motivated them to achieve these goals. As I said, both Tai Lung and Po aspired to be great, but Tai Lung's drive for greatness came from a hunger for validation. It was not enough for him to just be great. He craved external acknowledgement. He needed the title of Dragon Warrior to cement his worth to himself as well as others around him. In this way, his ambition twisted into an obsession. And when this ambition was taken away from him, it shattered his sense of self. In contrast, Po's journey wasn't driven by a need for approval. He didn't care about fame or titles. He just loved Kung Fu. Po's pursuit of greatness came from a place of passion and wonder, not ego. Even when he was declared the Dragon Warrior, Po didn't seek the title for validation. Instead, he was driven by a desire to live out his dream and learn the art of Kung Fu. His sense of self-worth wasn't tied to the recognition of others. Now, you can see where Tai Lung's path diverged. His ambition turned toxic, and the more he craved the Dragon Scroll, the more his internal darkness grew. When he didn't get what he believed he deserved, that frustration and sense of injustice consumed him. It transformed him into the vengeful villain we see in the film. Here we can also draw a comparison between Tai Lung and the Furious Five. Both trained under Master Shifu and were assumed to be the potential candidates for the Dragon Scroll, but they were still not chosen by Oogway. The Furious Five could have easily fallen into the same trap as Tai Lung, allowing the disappointment of not being chosen to consume them. After all, they too had dedicated their lives to Kung Fu, training endlessly with the hope of becoming the Dragon Warrior. But when Oogway preferred a skill-less panda over them, they remained focused on their higher purpose, the responsibility to protect the value of peace and the greater good, unlike Tai Lung, whose ego overpowered and whose ambitions became entirely self-serving. Still, I don't completely blame the snow leopard for his transgression. I know. Hear me out. Let me explain. Take a look at these two moments from the film.
Shifu trained him. He believed in him.
No, I'm not saying that Shifu's affectionate treatment toward Tai Lung compared to Tigress is the reason Tai Lung ended up the way he did. And no, I'm definitely not suggesting that Kung Fu masters should never be gentle with their students, otherwise they'll turn into power-hungry, vengeful villains bent on destruction. That's not it at all. Take another look at Tai Lung after he delivers the kick.
In Kung Fu, Shifu trained him.
See what's happening here? After the kick, what does he do? He immediately looks back at Shifu, seeking his reaction. Shifu is not only impressed, but his expressions show obvious happiness at the display of talent. This affirms the little Tai Lung, who observes how this being good at Kung Fu makes Shifu, his master and his father, proud of him. Now, take a look at this shot. He has clearly grown into a much stronger and skilled warrior, but notice what happens immediately after he destroys the training post. He once again looks back at Shifu, seeking that familiar approval, and once again, Shifu nods in appreciation. This moment isn't just about showcasing his abilities, it's about seeking affirmation, proving once again that his sense of worth is still deeply tied to Shifu's recognition. This reveals a deeper flaw in how Tai Lung was raised and trained. From the beginning, Shifu's encouragement and praise were conditional upon Tai Lung's success. His value was based on his abilities, his potential, and his achievements. This created a belief in Tai Lung that to be worthy of love and approval, he had to excel. The more he impressed Shifu, the more his ambition grew, not out of greed, but out of a desire to please the only person who mattered to him. Shifu, in return, reinforced this by treating Tai Lung as someone destined for greatness, constantly pushing him to reach higher.
He told him he was destined for greatness.
For Tai Lung, these expectations became his driving force. His ambition wasn't born from a lust for power. It was a product of his need to fulfill the role Shifu had created for him. That is, to be great. And even if Shifu never told him that he was supposed to be the Dragon Warrior, it was the ultimate merit of greatness for him. When that dream was denied, it wasn't just a blow to his ego, it shattered the very foundation of his identity. Everything he had worked for, everything he thought defined him, was suddenly stripped away. Look at Tai Lung's gaze right when Oogway communicates his decision.
What did you do?
In that moment, Tai Lung's eyes immediately turned to Shifu, desperate for his master, his father, to stand up for him. There's an agonizing hope in his gaze, pleading for Shifu to defend him, to affirm his worth. But when Shifu remains silent, offering no support, it breaks Tai Lung. You can almost feel the devastation in his eyes as the reality of Shifu's inaction sinks in. For Tai Lung, this wasn't just a rejection, it must have felt like the ultimate betrayal. Imagine training your entire life with the sole purpose of making one person proud, of proving yourself worthy in their eyes. But when the moment finally comes, the moment where all your years of dedication, blood, sweat, and tears should culminate in recognition, that person turns away. Instead of defending your honor and acknowledging your worth, they remain silent, leaving you to face rejection alone. And remember, these expectations, this dream, weren't even Tai Lung's own. They were shaped by how he was raised and trained. His entire sense of self was molded around fulfilling a role he believed was his destiny, and we even see him confronting Shifu during the final fight sequence at the Jade Palace.
Who filled my head with dreams? Who drove me to train until my bones cracked? Who denied me my destiny?
And let me be clear, I don't think Master Shifu was a bad character. He genuinely believed he was doing what was best for Tai Lung. Shifu's intentions came from a place of love and care. He wanted to help Tai Lung reach his full potential, but in his eagerness to mold Tai Lung into a great warrior, Shifu unknowingly contributed to his ultimate decline. It was this perceived betrayal combined with a burden of expectation, an intense need for external validation, and a misguided sense of purpose that turned Tai Lung into a purely evil and thoroughly vengeful villain we see. And before I move forward, let me take a minute to appreciate his character design. Seriously, what an incredible job the art directors do with Tai Lung. His design perfectly embodies the vengeful, ferocious villain he becomes, both in presence and in action. First off, honestly, the choice to make him a snow leopard was genius. I say it because snow leopards are natural predators, sitting at the top of the food chain, which immediately reinforces Tai Lung's dominance and status as a powerful threat. His broad, muscular build communicates raw power the moment you see him, signaling that this is a character who can crush his opponents without breaking a sweat. Then there are his piercing yellow eyes, which add an extra layer of menace, making it clear that he's someone you don't want to mess with. On top of that, Tai Lung's fighting style is a nod to traditional leopard-style kung fu, which emphasizes upper body strength, speed, and agility, traits Tai Lung displays in every action sequence. He's not just strong, he's fast, precise, and most importantly, cunning. All of these elements come together to create a character who not only feels dangerous, but looks like the ultimate badass on screen. Okay, now on to the important part. Yes, an amazing character design is crucial in making your villain visually impactful. But how do you actually write one? How do you craft a vengeful villain like Tai Lung who leaves a lasting impression not just through action, but through character depth? And it can be a make or break point of your story, because a well-written, vengeful villain like Tai Lung adds immense value to his story. He must not just be a force of destruction, his backstory and motivations need to create emotional tension that elevates the stakes for both the hero and the audience. His personal grievances make him relatable, which in turn makes his downfall more tragic and his actions more intense. A character like Tai Lung provides a compelling counterbalance to the hero, driving the story forward and making the hero's ultimate triumph all the more rewarding. Villains like him give the story its emotional weight, complexity, and depth. And let's take in everything we gathered from breaking down Tai Lung's character to discuss what you need to craft such an antagonist. Writing a compelling, vengeful villain isn't just about making them evil, it's about giving them depth, purpose, and a story that draws the audience in. Here's how to do that. Step 1. Give the villain layers of depth. A convincing villain isn't just evil for the sake of being evil. They need layers of depth. Tai Lung wasn't born a villain. He started as an abandoned cub and was raised by someone who loved him and pushed him to reach his full potential. His eventual fall from grace is rooted in his personal struggles and complex relationship with his mentor. A well-crafted villain needs more than just malicious intent. Give them intricate relationships and a past that shapes their character and explains their descent into darkness. Make them human before they become evil. Tai Lung's layered character shows us a tragic journey where ambition, rejection, and a need for validation collide, making him far more compelling than a one-dimensional bad guy. The key to making a villain like Tai Lung effective is giving them a story that feels real and relatable. Tai Lung's backstory, driven by his desire to become the Dragon Warrior, is something the audience can connect with, especially the feeling of striving for something and being denied it. Rejection is a universal experience. It's something we have all faced at some point in our lives. So when Tai Lung's dreams are crushed, we can empathize with his pain. Even if the audience doesn't agree with his actions, they can understand where he's coming from. When writing your antagonist, focus on a conflict that resonates on a personal level. Whether it's ambition, heartbreak, or betrayal, tie their motivations to experiences the audience can empathize with. The best villains aren't distant, they're relatable even through their flaws. Step 3. Give the villain convincing reasons and motivations. A great villain needs clear, convincing motivations for their revenge. Tai Lung's drive for vengeance isn't random. It's born out of his overwhelming desire to prove himself and fulfill what he believed was his life's purpose, becoming the Dragon Warrior. He spent his entire life training, convinced that he was destined for greatness, only to be denied that title. His motivation is deeply personal, and from his perspective, his actions felt justified, which is key when writing a vengeful villain. When you create your villain, don't just give them a simple desire for revenge. Make their motivations stem from their personal history and emotional needs. Make it personal and make it hurt. Step 4. Make the villain powerful. One of the most fundamental things that makes Tai Lung such an unforgettable villain is his sheer power. From the moment we're introduced to him, his strength and skill are established, whether it's through the awe and fear he evokes in others or the way he handles himself in battle. He's a physical and psychological threat to everyone in the story. When writing a villain, make them powerful enough to challenge your hero. It's not just about physical strength, though that helps, but also about intelligence, cunning, and psychological dominance. Tai Lung isn't just strong, he's smart, calculated, and relentless. A powerful villain forces your hero to rise to the occasion, which makes their eventual victory really fulfilling. To make your villain's impact even more intense, contrast them with other characters in the story. Tai Lung's ambition, rage, and need for validation are sharply contrasted with Po's humanity, inner peace, and passion for Kung Fu. Po never seeks external validation, while Tai Lung's entire identity is built around it. This stark contrast not only highlights Tai Lung's inner struggles, but also deepens the thematic elements of the film. When writing your villain, use contrast to elevate their presence. Whether it's contrasting them with the hero or other characters, this technique helps highlight the villain's traits, making them feel even more impactful in the story. And there you have it. By successfully combining all these elements, you can create an antagonist who isn't just a force to be defeated, but a complex, multidimensional character who adds value to the story. Tai Lung is the perfect example and undeniably one of DreamWorks' most popular villains with a dedicated fanbase of his own. If you enjoyed this breakdown of Tai Lung and found it helpful, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment below which villain breakdown you'd like to see next.